everybody. Today we're going to talk about Citcon 2955 that just happened yesterday, and just kind of want to quickly give you guys some of my initial thoughts. Let's look again at a couple things that we saw yesterday, and then also, what we think that means for Star Citizen this next year. And also, one of the things I want to talk about is why they didn't talk about anything related to Squadron 42. That's kind of what we're going to talk about. To go back to my initial thoughts yesterday, and they've changed a little bit since. Initially, I wasn't too upset because, like I said, I wanted something that was tangible, something with a date or a timeline attached to it, not just look at what we're working on potentially that'll happen in the future years from now, which I understand the frustration with that. But then again, that is kind of what these conventions are supposed to be like. They're supposed to show you everything they're working on and hoping for the future. But initially, I was relieved that we got something that had a timeline to it. And then, quite frankly, when it comes to, ships and weapons, those are easily something you can put in ISC for 10 minutes and you don't need to talk more about it. I just don't see the point. It's not going to create any gameplay. It's not going to change any gameplay, really. These ships aren't being added because certain things have become available in the verse. Data running still not a thing. Exploration still not a thing. There's so many things that are still lacking for some of these ships to really make sense. And so that stuff I typically don't care about. I don't find that important for Star Citizen right now. I think that's just mainly for them to continue funding, which, that's a separate discussion. We saw Nyx. Nyx was impressive. Well, the one planet was impressive. And Levski, seeing that come back is cool. Actually, I'm not one of those people who got to play around with Levski when it was in the verse. I came in right after that, I think. So I missed out on Levski, and I'm looking forward to going and visiting it. This idea that they're going to build the system in front of us, and that's like this new thing, is ridiculous. That's completely untrue. They've been building Pyro in front of us this whole time, and actually we're going to get a system with less than what Pyro had when it came out first. Or we'll have to see what it comes out to be when it actually releases, but probably we're going to have Levski and that one planet, and that's it. It's not something new that they've done. This entire game is being built in front of us, and we're here testing it and pushing it for them. So I don't really like that. The scale of what they're trying to do with the planet tech is really impressive. Objectively, Genesis, the planet tech, was the real only moment during the Citcon where I was just like, damn, that shit looks crazy. That looks fantastic. I want to play in that. I want to explore that. Absolutely. And that's probably the highlight for me of this Citcon was the planet tech and, new content coming in. To talk about the content quickly, they're acting as if they're finally adding in the Vanduul, but they never showed a single Vanduul in like a pilot seat or anything like that. And they never showed any kind of boarding or FPS with the Vanduul. I don't think we're going to see that right away, and I don't necessarily expect it, but again, it's this way of marketing it as, look, we're putting in the aliens. Like, well, no, you're putting in their ships. The ships have been in game. The only thing that would potentially be new is the king ship or queen ship, whatever they call it. The larger capital class ships for the Vanduul. That would be new, and that would be cool. And again, I'm looking forward to that gameplay loop, but this way of presenting things of like being like this new incredible thing, I can't stand that corpo marketing BS. I'm not a fan of it. But again, credit where credit's due. Planet Tech looks freaking amazing. And if they can get that into games sooner than later, that will be fantastic. I know a lot of people were thinking it might go to Microtech first, but it looks like we're going to be getting it in Nyx. So that's cool. I'd say we still should keep an eye out on Stanton and Pyro because they may be influenced by it. And yes, I think the actual physical Vanduuls are something that won't come into the game until Squadron 42 is released. That makes a ton of sense to me. And I think that these large scale ship battles are meant to test things out for Squadron, since there has to be plenty of alien content in a game where you're fighting aliens. It just kind of seems normal. Let's talk about crafting quickly before we get to the juicy stuff with instancing. I think crafting the way they have it set up as a mobile crafter is actually really cool. And I think it's really cool that you're going to be using the SCU boxes. They slap into place, and then that's how you process your, materials that you need to craft certain things. I hope they think through how to get things in boxes. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you're just getting one SCU of copper and one SCU of titanium and tungsten or whatever to mix in a recipe, awesome. If it's smaller things and we have to then take the time to go through our inventory, to put it into a box, to put the box, I'm just trying to paint the picture of I hope they don't have too many steps. And I hope it's large blocks of materials and not, Wicklow stuff where I was I need one can of fizz, I need a cheddar and ham burrito, I need, noodles from Pyro, I need an Alloprat skewer from... Yeah, I hope it doesn't become a bunch of little tedious things. And exactly, because transferring those little things to boxes is still messy, it's still clunky, so I think there needs to be something refined there before we really see anything. I think crafting coming into the game is going to be really important. I'm not sure exactly when it's supposed to slot in. I'd seen some people say that it's supposed to come in with engineering, which kind of makes sense. But then again, I'm starting to worry because it sounds like a lot of things are trying to come in with engineering, and that probably won't be a positive experience. So I hope they flesh that out and maybe do it, release things over a month or two, and hopefully, hotfix patch as they go. I hope they fix the crafting so that when this actually comes out, it makes more sense. And what I mean by fix the crafting is fix the hand ends with Wicklow, all that stuff, because it's going to be the same system, I'm sure, as what we get with the mobile crafter. Now on to instancing. I understand why people are upset about it, because the idea is this game is supposed to be a sandbox. However, I think, it's pretty clear that the initial vision of Star Citizen has changed from where it was when it first began. So the scope of things has changed a bit. The ambition has changed a bit. Now things are really, real time, moving around on a huge scale. I think that type of game, PvPvE, appeals to, a pretty specific type of players. And when you add in things that are heavily industrial, that are, not combat oriented, you're going to get a mix of people. And I think, and we talked about this briefly on Tuesday at the last podcast, is, I understand people saying that, well, this is how the game is supposed to be, just deal with it. I get that. I do. Because you bought in thinking it was going to be a certain concept. The reality is the concept is changing a bit. And what I always found really funny is, for me, at least in my experience, the majority of the gamers, the users, the fucking Tron, the majority of the players tend to be PvE players, but that's true with many games. Let's take Tarkov as an example, right? As soon as they launched PvE, there was a mass exodus from the PvP servers, because PvP comes with a bunch of downsides, right? PvP can be a lot of fun, but it's very quick to become a slippery slope because of the competitiveness. The second you add in that element, there's people who are going to try to cheat, who are going to try to gain an advantage, who are going to simply go after people because they find it amusing. And, you can like it or not, that does create problems for this other group of gamers who are not interested in that. So you have these two very defined communities within this game. You have to cater to both of them to a certain extent. And I think that this balance of entirely sandbox activities, Hathor, the new mining laser thing that's coming in Nyx, those are truly PvPvE events, and they should stay that way. And I also agree that having instanced well, essentially we're calling them, they're dungeons, right? But having those things being instants is going to be great for a whole other group of players, but also for the PvPers, because I'm sorry, I'm not one of those people who can consistently, repetitively do the same thing over and over again. So I'm not going to always be PvPing. I'm not going to always be PvEing. I'm not going to always be doing industrial. I like to mix it up, and I like to change based off my mood and what I feel like doing. And I think a lot of players are like that. And I think sometimes you get lost in these voices that are screaming for one thing or the other, just basically two extremes. And sometimes what's in the middle gets a little lost. So I think the instancing is a good thing for all groups of players, because it'll give people a place to go relieve the frustration of having to deal with the PU. It'll give them something they can do as a closed group with friends, which which will be fun in itself. And you still can get those players going to or leaving these instances most likely. So that's not going to be 100% safe. So there's still a balance. And I think it's important to have that. I personally want instanced dungeons, not so much to avoid the PvP, but just because it's tailored content. That's how you can put something together that actually has a story and, follows a, in French you'd say une trame narrative. In English I'm spacing on the words, but it basically follows progression, and it's easier to curate and give a story around it. Whereas something's completely sandboxed, people can completely go besides, how many of you actually know what's going on at Hathor? None of you. Most of us don't, because we don't go looking for the info. It's not easily findable. It's not something we come across. So we're not going to go looking for it. And I think, Lemad makes a good point. MMOs without anything instance feels kind of weird. Like, yeah, the idea is to have everything be as open world and sandbox as possible, but technically there are limitations. I think instancing, that's why they instance hangers. It takes a big load off the server. I think it'll be beneficial to Star Citizen in the long run to have certain things instanced, just to relieve pressure on the replication layer, which has so much data to go through. So I don't see how that's typically a bad thing. But I understand the argument of, this is supposed to be an open world sandbox, there should be no instancing. I hear you there. I think the balance will make things better, though. I think it's performance driven, which is absolutely fine, in my opinion, because this game needs more effort put on the performance, even though it's gotten a lot better. Let's be honest, in the last 6 to 8 months, it's gotten way better. Starting in March is when we really started feeling the bug fixes. It also coincides with when they started saying, hey, we kind of fucked up, we got to fix some shit so you guys can actually play it. I think one side is performance, but I also think it's catering to two groups of people. I don't think you can cater to everyone. A game for everyone is a game for no one. Yes, absolutely. But content wise, you also have to strike that balance of, well, we can't have it be purely only ever PvP, because, well, how does that fit in with the industrial game loop? Because think about it. That means you're expecting a player to do the industrial stuff purely to be bait for pirates and PvP. I don't think that's smart. And I don't think that makes sense for the player just doing the industrial. They're not going to stick around for very long. They'll end up going to Space Trucker or some other game. And that's the other thing people have to think about is, you make certain moves to specifically in one direction, you're going to push away a group of people. Now, I'm not saying that you should try to, like I was just saying, you shouldn't try to make everyone happy, but you got to kind of make certain choices where you can strike a balance. And I think the balance in Star Citizen is something we won't truly feel until we get to 1.0, because there's just too much stuff that has to come in. And I'll make this point about ships. Everybody talks about the new ship comes out and it's the meta. Yeah, it's the meta now, but that doesn't matter in the long term, because the second the game gets closer to 1.0, there's going to be a rebalancing, and what you feel now is not going to be the reality then. At least I don't think so. There's maybe certain cases where things will stay the same, but I wouldn't bet on that. And that's a great point, Toad. I think instances would be very helpful for people to learn the game without the added pressure of, oh shit, that's a player, and we're dead. And let's talk about this Citcon presentation overall, like what it was compared to the two previous ones, for example. Well, clearly it was a big change because, it was online and not in person. I think this really was just a big ISC, really. There wasn't anything really besides Genesis that was absolutely crazy. The overall presentation, I thought, if you go back and you compare it to last year's or the year before, and yesterday on stream before Citcon, we watched a bit of the previous years. I mean, clearly this was a big change. I really feel like this was just a big ISC. And when you take into account how little ISCs or Star Citizen Lives we got throughout the year, this was a little light. A little light. And, you know, the real positives for me, at least personally, that I take away from this are Genesis, all that Planet Tech, Nyx coming soon, even if it's a barren, very early version of Nyx. I think I'd still rather see, you know, even though I don't agree with them phrasing it as like, oh, this whole new thing that we're going to do. I still think that seeing things come in quicker, even if it's not as much, is better for us as players or testers, if you want to just go, you know, talk about it that way, because we're always testing something out, which keeps the interest kind of alive. One of the things I hated from 2024 and 2023 was these long stints in between patches where stuff just gets so stale. And I feel like this year they definitely had, you know, they definitely made that feel a lot better. I think the presentation wasn't that great overall. I think, you know, a lot of people are going to be like, yeah, you know, I saw some of these comments on YouTube. It's like, you know, I think this one was great because it wasn't all the over-promising that they did in the past. I'll concede to that point. I think that was interesting, that they kind of shrunk it down to what they really knew they were going to deliver on. But I think just that right there is kind of a problem because, A, we didn't talk about a lot of stuff we've seen in the previous two Citcons. We didn't really talk about base building at all. We didn't talk about Starware Cloth at all. We didn't talk at all about engineering. And engineering was supposed to be out with 4.0 back in January. Just a reminder. And there are other things we didn't talk about that we've seen in the past. What was another one? Oh, the biggest one. The reason why a lot of us are here in the first place. Squadron 42 was not at all talked about. Now, yes, they told us going into this they weren't going to talk about it. But I think that's very telling. I think there's clearly something going on there. And I've kind of gone back and forth on this a lot myself, and I've talked about it with others who are outside of the game and don't play it, but who have been following the project as well. Sometimes it's good to get perspective, take a step back. And basically, what came from these conversations was something must have happened with Squadron, because I do actually believe it is feature complete. But if they are not talking about it, because there was this embargo, or there's been this embargo on information about Squadron 42, I think something must have happened for them to realize, okay, this isn't good enough. We need to do more. I don't think it's actor issues because those guys are under contracts and those usually are freaking ironclad. I don't think it has to do with the cinematic stuff or the motion cap. I think it has to do, my personal belief is they finished it. They got it to a place where they could start really testing it and playing it, and they realized that it was like 25 hours long. And that's not acceptable. It has to be longer. And so I think that they either ran into a technical issue with the engine that took longer to fix, and they weren't able to implement something in game or a fix to get Squadron 42 working properly. And, you know, I'd go back to last year's Citcon where we saw the crash, you know, mid-demo in the first hour of gameplay. And I'm not using that as a dig against CIG. It's just a reality of what happened. And my concern is that they've now realized, and why we're seeing, you know, a weird development in Star Citizen. And I'm weird. By weird, I mean we're seeing a lot of content and no features. Makes me think that something either went very wrong with the engine making Squadron, or something went very wrong in the final product and they realized that they could not release it like that. And there would be too much backlash, and that would be potentially the end of the project overall. And we don't want to see that. It could maybe also realize, like Stavo points out right now, that they finished it and it didn't feel the way they wanted it to. Like they realized that they had made a mistake somewhere in development, potentially the flight model, potentially maybe in how some of the missions play out. Maybe they realize there's too many cinematics and not enough gameplay. Viking, I'll concede that for a second. But I think the reality is if that's the case, now they're trying to add to the story, or they're just taking what was supposed to be episode 2 and they're putting it into episode 1. That's a point, Fuzz, that I'm going to get to here in a minute. That's what I'm going to end on. I don't know. Obviously, we can't know what happened until maybe after the game releases and they start to open up about it. But I think that we have to kind of look at this last year and be like, yes, okay, Star Citizen has a lot of positives. It's gotten more stable. It's gotten more performant. We've gotten way more content. There's a lot more to do that's funner than just repetitive grind of industrial bunkers or bounty loops. I think that's all been incredibly positive for the game right now. But if we look at that in relation to Squadron 42, because we're now 2 years after he said it was feature complete. It's 2 years now. If it was feature complete, now again, I'm not a developer, but I think, I've been around the video game industry long enough. I've been in the entertainment industry long enough to kind of understand that when things start to take way too long, stuff is typically going wrong. I think as we get certain ships from Squadron coming into the game, that's a good sign that Squadron is coming along and will eventually come out. But to go back to the reasons why I think not at all talking about it is a problem is because, well, that's the base of the entire project. And that's what we have all been a bit more, at least for myself and a large portion of the people in Star Citizen have been wanting to see, because, well, it's supposed to be around the corner, and it's been around the corner for 2 years now. So I think either they had a big problem with the engine, and that's why a lot of the feature people are not around right now. And that's why we didn't see too many features touted for the end of the year and next year in the verse. Or they finished it, realized there was a massive issue with playability, how it played out, or how long it was, and they had to fix that to make it a more enjoyable experience, or they had to elongate the story and the game and gameplay moments between cinematics. Which, by the way, quick side note on the whole cinematic thing, I don't give a crap if there's a lot of cinematics. I don't at all. Why? Because if they're good and the story's good, I'm watching and playing it like I'm in a movie. So what does it change for me at that point? Not much. Actually, it can help with the immersion. It's also a great moment to take breaks when there's like a 5-minute cinematic coming up. Just hit pause, come back, and then, eat some food while you watch the cinematic, whatever. Anyways, stupid jokes aside, I'm very hopeful for Squadron 42, and I'm kind of worried that what we've seen, or the lack of what we've seen in the last few months, and the fact that they didn't want to talk about it at all at Citcon is not a great indicator. Now, there is the other side of like, well, maybe they're doing it on purpose to get a bit more of a surprise factor when they do actually make an announcement. Maybe it's closer than we think, and they're just being super tight-lipped because they want to generate a lot of good momentum around it, which I think would be something good. And I'm not, well-versed enough in marketing to know what potentially all the ploys are around that. I think, and what I keep saying I want to see is at the end of a Citcon or another presentation, they go, oh yeah, and by the way, Squadron's out now, and just drops the mic and walks off stage, and everybody goes fucking insane. That's my dream. Okay. That's my dream. But yeah, so I think one of the bad things from this Citcon was nothing about Squadron 42, and yes, I know they had said so, but again, the fact that they wouldn't even talk about it is not great. The Idris was a good surprise. The Idris, I think, was a positive surprise for the verse, because it's a stepping stone. It means that we can actually put these big-ass ships in the verse now without roasting the servers. I think that was a positive. I cleared all that. Maybe they want to manage the start of their marketing campaign. No, we know they've wanted to do that. Sandy has been very vocal and adamant that her push for Squadron 42 is going to be very big and separate to Star Citizen. That's fine. But we need to see that push start to happen. Because if not, then I hope it's what I was just saying, where it's a bit more of a surprise. And, those can create a lot of positive hype, good feedback. People have less time to debate whether the game's going to be good or bad, and they just play it. But yeah, I think there's still a very good chance that we'll see Squadron in 2026. I'm trying to say that as objectively as possible, because if I let my hopium come in, then my hopium says I want it to be dropped in like February of 2026, but we all know it's not going to happen. The other thing, and why I think maybe there's some positives and it's not a lost cause, is because we've seen more and more of what's in Squadron coming into the verse. So like these Vanduul raiding parties, that's purely there, in my opinion, to test those in the verse environment and making sure that they work well in Squadron. I think that's the real reason behind that. And that, yeah, again, and that's positive in terms of like, okay, well, Squadron isn't dead, clearly. And I don't think Squadron's dead. And I'm not saying Squadron's dead. I'm just saying these delays and the refusal to talk about it, you know, brings up some question marks. But okay, I want to get into the ugly now. The bad. The very bad. The thing that I don't think enough people give them shit for. So let's get into what I consider to be the ugly with this. Unfortunately, you know, there had been videos about it last Citcon, and I refused to see them because I knew it was going to annoy me. I didn't want to see that. I don't think it's respectful to the community and the backers to show all the money they've spent on their office. Objectively, is it a beautiful office? Absolutely. It looks fucking fantastic. But let's just take a look at this. You know, Jared got all excited about this, but for me, these were some seriously cringe moments. The offices are beautiful, but you guys haven't released a finished product yet. How are you guys spending all this money on art, decoration, statues? That's backer money. And yes, other companies have done that and they do that, but those companies have delivered something. They finished a game. You know, I shit on Bethesda a lot, but I respect them in the sense that they earned their respect through Fallout 3, through New Vegas, through, no, that was Obsidian, through Fallout 3, Fallout 4, through Skyrim, Oblivion, Morrowind, Skyrim, all the Elder Scrolls. They earned their right to put 6-7 foot tall statues in their offices to redecorate. They definitely earned that. This is such bad optics. It's terrible. You know what the funny part is? They put a lot of money into Citcon last year, but clearly they put way more money into their office. We see, I mean, look, do these models look absolutely cool? Like, I would have been like, if there was just the model of the Bengal, I'd been like, that's fine. They spent a little bit of cash on that. Not a big deal. I think optics-wise, it's just such bad optics. It's in such poor taste. And again, I go back to, if they had actually delivered a finished product, it would have been fine. No one would care. You guys earned the right to do that. That's your flex because you had success. You don't get the flex just because you got a lot of people willing to give you their money for an unfinished project and the dream and the ambition you have. That doesn't justify going to spend all this money. You know, I'm gonna correct myself a little bit. A lot of this was probably created for certain Citcons, right? But having this kind of a layout in your office, like buying the building, spending all that money renovating, and no, it is not cheap, everybody. It's not like renovating a house. We're talking about industrial size. Like, there's a lot of code and regulations you have to follow. There's so many materials that go into building these things, these spaces, so many hours of work. Objectively, again, I think every single one of these things is fucking awesome. But it's just don't show us this. If you guys are so confident in your product and your project and you know it's going to come out soon, you're going to make all this money and people are going to be super happy because you can see the future, fine, do it, keep it behind closed doors, and then when the game comes out and has success, show all the cool shit. And I know this is not necessarily a popular opinion and some people don't understand. It's like, oh, what? It's cool. Who cares? No, it's our money that's going to developing a game that's being put into shit like this. And then they have to downsize their teams because they're realizing that their expenditure year over year is getting way too high. I don't want to see devs lose jobs. And I'm not saying that not making this would have kept the devs' job. I'm not saying that because we can't know what their financials are like. But I'm just saying, optic-wise, And, to point it out, the real problem isn't these individual items. It's the space they're in and how much money it must have taken to curate this, to build this, how much time. This is Randy Marsh with his Margaritaville. It's like, but I need this. No, you don't. Why are you guys getting drunk at work? Like, is this closed until 5 p.m.? Anyways, that's getting into more details. I just don't think, I don't know. I don't think we need to see all this. I think this is just bad optics. I'm not saying they don't deserve it, but actually I am. I'm saying right now there's a difference between good working conditions and excessive working conditions, because this costs a shit ton of money. Again, I think overall this was a decent Citcon. I don't think it was really a Citcon. I don't think we can truly look at it as a Citcon. I think it was just a big ISC. I think I know I just want to point out again that the fact that we didn't see that many features is kind of troubling. And it's not like I expected a bunch of new stuff. No, I think we need to stop on the new stuff. But what's the development been on base building since we last saw it? What's the development been on craft? Well, we saw a little bit of crafting, but that was just mobile crafting. We don't know what a crafting is going to look like tied to your base or anything like that at all. It going to mean for, Starware, Starcloth? Is that something that's tied to the engine? We didn't see anything about Star Engine and its updates, which kind of feeds into what I was saying earlier about, well, there may be something wrong with the engine, which is why a lot of the feature people have just kind of disappeared. I just think overall this wasn't the greatest. Now, I do appreciate, and I totally align with people who say, well, I can appreciate the smaller amount of information released because they typically always overpromise and underdeliver. Absolutely. 100% agree with you there. But at the same time, this is something that's supposed to make everybody like, you're supposed to come out of one of these conventions and be like, oh, fuck, that's going to be freaking awesome. And that was more the feeling I had with the last two. This was a little underwhelming. I think what we're getting content-wise is very interesting. Like I said, I think Genesis is going to be great. Really curious to see how that comes out. I think the Vanduul raids will be interesting to finally see that in the verse. And I think, doing events like the Star Wars attack, the Star Destroyer, or not the Star Destroyer, the Death Star run. Finally, fuck, why couldn't I remember that? The Death Star run. I think that'll be really cool. And I think that kind of stuff is more of what we need in the verse. But we're going to get a weird release of Nyx. It's not going to, I got to dive deeper, and as I'm editing this for YouTube, I will try and put that in there of exactly what they said was going to come out in a month. A lot of people are saying just Levski. I thought it was going to be the first planet and Levski. I may be wrong. And yeah, I think overall, there's not too much to be negative about. So the good. Genesis, content coming in, looks promising. Really want to say Genesis looks super fucking impressive. The bad, well, lack of information on things we've been waiting for quite a while that were supposed to be here already, engineering, stuff like that. And for me, the cringe is, flaunting the offices and how much money they've clearly spent on them when we're still waiting for so much to be delivered. And again, my real criticism there is you guys haven't finished a single product and you're flexing like you have. Now, granted, they've made 800 millions. That's over 800 million. That's a flex in itself. And that's just backer funds. That's not counting the 50 to 150 they got in private investment. Now, if they had come out and been like, oh, we took the private investment and we put that into building our offices, I don't think the private investors would have been very happy about that, seeing as how now they're going on 10 plus years of having invested without seeing, a finished product. And it all depends on how they negotiated those contracts, but they could be seeing a piece of the backer money that's coming in. They could not, and they may only see a piece of the pie once the game is sold as complete. I don't know how their contracts were designed. I don't know what the terms were, what fail-safes were in there. But at least we do know there was private investment, and not just backer funds. So they're very close to the $1 billion now over 13 years. I was looking at an article this morning from back in 2015 where they had already raised 74 million. So in 10 years, they've raised another $720 million, which is pretty insane. But I want to remind all of you that as they get bigger and as they grow, their expenditure goes way up. So their costs go way up. So even though they're racking in 80 to 100 million a year, if their expenses are above that, which, they've got now around 1,000, 1,100 devs. They were up to 1,300 at one point, but then they cut a bunch of jobs. Some people left, some seniors left. So maybe they're replacing those seniors with people who were juniors or, somewhere in the middle of the hierarchy, and they're paying them a little less, but they're still knowledgeable on the project. I don't know. They haven't really communicated on that. I just don't agree with showing that kind of stuff or having that nice of a space when I feel like they haven't earned it. I know it's not going to be popular. I know it sounds kind of mean, but at the same time, I really want to see this project succeed. I've put a lot of money into it as well, and I don't like this. Personally, I don't like this. Now, you're allowed to have your opinion. I think it's a waste. Honestly, put that money towards, better tools for your engineers, your devs, more staff if you need it to be able to pump things out quicker. Different teams so you can allow your people to have time off. Because I'm sorry, you can work in the nicest space in the world, but if you're working there 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, it sucks because you don't want to be there. It doesn't matter where you're working. So you could have the nicest area in the world. If you're being overworked and you're not getting paid enough, that just adds to your frustration of being there. It is not a plus. It is a downside. And I dare anyone to go work in those conditions where you have the greatest space, but you're underpaid and overworked, and tell me after a few months that you're still super happy. I just don't see that being reality. So again, my final thoughts on this are, it was a great ISC. I'm really interested to see how Genesis turns out. I think that looks fucking fantastic. I'm really worried my computer is going to catch fire when we first run it. I think this new content we're getting in, even though it's probably not going to be everything we hope for, but the Vandal raids are going to be awesome. It's going to be a huge boost for PvE in the verse. I think instancing will be a positive in the long run, even though it may have shaky starts. And I totally understand the PvP community and the open world sandbox community being like, that's not what we wanted. But I think the reality of MMOs is you kind of have to have that stuff in order for it to make sense. Not everything can be fully open all the time, just from a technical standpoint, and technology and what they're able to do, but also from a gameplay standpoint. I think it's really interesting what Neuro said. Neuro, he's not shy about saying he was a murder hobo, but now he's a reformed murder hobo. He's retired and he wants to do something else. And so there's still plenty for him to do in the verse, and it shouldn't always be around PvP. I have nothing but respect for piracy. I have nothing but respect for great combat pilots. I think what they do is super impressive, and I love watching a lot of what the pirates do. I find it hilarious, but I don't think we need that consistently in the verse. And I think that having moments to breathe and allowing players to do different things is very important and is a very big positive. I don't care about ships and guns. I don't think we need anything about that, to be honest. The only ships I think we're all interested in, we didn't see anything about, and that would be the Kraken, the Ironclad, the Perseus, the Galaxy, the Crucible, the Liberator, those bigger ships that have a specific role or support role that we just don't have in game yet. So for me, the ships just wasn't interesting. The weapons, really didn't see why that needed to be in. I think that was just kind of filler at that point. Does the LMG look cool? Fuck yes, I will get that. Or I will hunt for it so I can play with it in game immediately. I don't care too much about the armors because the armors don't have their, specs attached to them yet. Like the different buffs or debuffs that are supposed to come with them. So that wasn't that interesting. Hearing Nyx is going to be first introduced here in the next month, that was a big positive. Another disappointing thing, I wish they'd given us an indication as to whether engineering was actually going to have its tech preview before the end of the year or not. Maybe they don't know, it's too close. But again, this is a Citcon. It should be a celebration of all the things coming to the game and the evolution of the things in the game. So I feel like it was a perfect place to talk about that. What else? And yeah, I guess, and please spend more money on the game and your people instead of the offices they work in, because at the end of the day, money in their pocket, money put into the game is going to pay off way more than a super sexy office right now. So those are my thoughts. If you have any comments you think differently, please feel free to go ahead and comment down below. Leave a like and definitely sub if you enjoyed the content and you want to see more. And I'll see you on the next one.